welcome everybody to another episode of the Men's Sexual Mastery Podcast. In the last episode, we dove into non-ejaculatory orgasms and ways men can begin to experience those states and tools for them. And one of the tools we spoke to in the last episode was the big draw. And in today's episode, we're going to be following up on that most recent episode to go into the details of the big draw for men who are new to this work and how you can bring this practice into your sex life and begin to experience these deeper states of pleasure that are separate from the primary states most of us have entrained ourselves through pornography and constant ejaculation. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Hawks, to share with us a little background about the big draw. Where does this come from, and how can guys begin to work with this practice?
So the big draw comes from Taoist lineages. It's been studied and developed over millennia, and Montauk Chia is who we have to thank for sharing these practices with the modern Western world. What I would like to start with is adding to what you said there, Ben, about yes, we can experience new and greater states of pleasure and orgasmic bliss by incorporating practice like this. And it might be of interest to men out there to know that this practice is also incredibly effective in helping us withhold our ejaculation longer, to have prolonged periods of lovemaking and develop much more mastery and command over our ejaculatory response, which for many men is still something relatively involuntary. So a practice like this, paired with other mental practices, allows us to take what was once an involuntary muscle spasm and allow it to become voluntary. So it's a very empowering practice, as all of this work is. What we're really in service to is the empowerment of each of you out there to feel really confident and capable and competent in how you're navigating your sexual experiences. Ideally, for your highest good and the highest good of your partner. So with that, I want to speak to a little bit overview of what the big draw is. It's essentially a combination of intentional breathing and muscular contractions. And I want to demystify the big draw a little bit because it could come across as, okay, well, this is a Taoist practice that has been studied and shared by sages, and there's some energy elements to it, but does it really work? If someone has a very scientifically oriented mind, what I want to share with you is that quite simply what something like the big draw is doing is it is moving blood and our energy out of the genitals. And there needs to be a certain amount of blood and energy built up in the genitals in order for an ejaculation to happen. So by doing a practice like the big draw, we're simply removing some of that blood and energy so that there isn't enough for that ejaculation to even happen. And where we're moving that energy is up the spine and eventually all the way up to the head. And this is one of the ways that we can start to open up that back channel of sexual energy movement and flow, and that will over time eventually allow us to master our ejaculatory response and also experience these non-ejaculatory orgasms. So that's where I would like to start out, just naming some of those pieces. And then it feels like it would also be valuable at this point, Ben, to speak to a little bit of the cautions or disclaimers before we get into the how. Let's talk about what's important to know before engaging with something like this.
Yeah, this is a really important piece because a lot of these tools are generally passed down in a sequence, and this is what's within our training as well. This practice isn't brought in until later in the training. It's a more advanced practice. So as we speak to all the time in this work, the nature of sexual energy in traditional Chinese medicine and in these lineages is taught to be an accelerant. It will bind and amplify whatever's going on. And a practice like this can be moving a lot of energy. It's sending a lot of energy up, towards the head from the lower sexual centers, through these pathways, and that can bring up a lot of experiences for certain guys. So always finding harmony in all things, what they call the middle path in Taoism, is what we're trying to achieve to make sure we stay balanced through these practices. So yeah, Hawks, I'd love to turn it over to you and hear a little bit about how guys can balance this.
Sure. I want to add in there that a practice like this is not only moving the energy, it's also amplifying our sexual energy.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, where I'll speak to like when and where we would incorporate a practice like the big draw. Typically, it's coming in when we're at a state of high sexual arousal. So you're in a full erection, and you've been building up arousal and stimulation, and you get to a place where you're not yet at the point of no return. So you're not going so far, you're not edging so far that you're going to spill over into an ejaculation, but you can come pretty close up to that edge. So we're building a lot of sexual energy in the system. And then when we use a practice like the big draw, we're refraining from an ejaculation that will then release and dissipate that energy. And we're actually allowing it to amplify and grow by moving it out of the sex center. We can store that energy, and then it opens up the ability to now build up more sexual energy again. So we're amplifying energy as well as moving it, and that's where this cautionary piece around the binding and amplifying nature of sexual energy is that if you're in a really difficult emotional state, if you have anger or frustration or immense grief, or other heavy dense emotions, it's not unlikely that a practice like this will actually amplify some of that, and that might not be ideal for you. So all that to say, it's what we encourage is that before going into a practice like this, you tend to yourself and check in. And if there's a lot of big, dense energy in you, then doing something else to allow that energy to move before going into an amplification of sexual energy through a practice like this. So I would encourage the energy that we bring into really any sexual practice, and especially something like the big draw, is one of joyful playfulness. It's also important to not go into something like this really rigid. Trying to force that energy up doesn't typically work, and it can lead to some blockages or energy getting stuck in parts of the body, certain organs or the head, where it's actually going to cause some dysregulation for us. So being soft, relaxed, playful, and bringing that energy of joy and love into the experience, that's all going to help you to actually do the practice successfully. And it's also going to allow you to then amplify those buoyant, light, enjoyable energies rather than amplifying something that we might not be at a place to really, manage. So with that, the other piece I would speak to is the energy potentially getting stuck in the head. And so this will make sense, I hope, when we get into the how and actually explain what we're doing and the steps. But the last piece here I want to speak to is that this energy can sometimes get stuck in the head. And so the way that we allow energy to move from the head back down into the lower parts of the body is first and foremost connecting the tongue to the roof of the mouth. And so when we finish this practice and at little pauses between it and during, we want to make sure we're connecting that tongue to the roof of the mouth and allowing that energy to then come down into the body, and also taking some rest after something like this, and really focusing on sending that energy down into the navel, or even down into the bottoms of the feet and the toes. Um, that will help you avoid things like a headache or pressure in the head and other forms of dysregulation or discomfort. So,
Real quick,
with that,
just to
yeah,
speak for those who may be scientifically minded and think this may be a little woo woo, placing the tongue to the roof of the mouth. This is an ancient, teaching and understanding within Taoism, within traditional Chinese medicine, that is taught to connect what's called the renmai and the dumai. Not that you need to know that, but that's basically the channel up the back of the body and the channel down the front of the body. And this was first observed, I thought this was cool to learn. It was first observed in newborn babies, that their tongue was on the roof of their mouth. And so when you're born and when you're a child, it's, especially as a toddler, this can be like a common way of being, that we come, out of the package as humans. And generally over time, as we develop, we stop placing our tongue on the roof of the mouth. But that's where this came from. And in the beginning, you may not feel any difference placing your tongue on the roof of your mouth, but over time, as you go deeper into these practices, it's like a little circuit breaker there. So just a little context about what that is. So yeah, you want to get into the how-to, Hawks?
So as I mentioned before, we're going to bring the big draw in when we're in a heightened state of sexual arousal already. And so this can be done on your own if you're in an intentional practice of cultivating sexual energy. We call it solo cultivation. It's a reclamation of masturbation. So we strongly encourage you to not use external stimulus like porn or other visual things, and instead take that energy back, the energy that you might place on a screen, reclaim that and place it inside your body so you can be more aware of what's actually happening internally for you, and can start to build up more sexual energy, coming into a place where you have an erection, and then you're building that pleasure up, and not coming right up to the edge, but coming to a place, might say, between 70 to 85% of the way to an ejaculation. And so that this can be done individually in a solo cultivation practice, and it can also absolutely be done in partnership, in sexual union. So once we are at that place where we're in a heightened state of sexual arousal, the first step is to pause. Just take a moment when you've built that energy up and you're feeling a lot of arousal, a lot of stimulation. Okay, just let's take a quick pause here. Gather yourself. And then there's a muscular contraction of the pelvic floor. So these muscles around our genitals and perineum. And what this is, I'll also say that I'm going to explain how I do it. And this might be a little different from how Montauk Chia describes it. It might be a little different from how you've heard it from someone else. And my perspective is that that's okay and that's natural. All of us will eventually, over time, develop our own certain recipe and our own way of doing it. And it's important to follow steps that are as close to the original teaching as possible at the beginning. And then over time, each of us, in my experience and observation, will find what works best for us. And so what I'm going to share is very close to how Montauk Chia describes it, but there might be a couple little differences, and it feels authentic and appropriate to share what actually works for me and what I do. So with that, we're building up the arousal, taking a brief pause to gather ourselves, to check in and make sure, okay, I'm not about to spill over into ejaculation, but there's a lot of energy here. And then I'll start to contract the muscles at the very front of the pelvic floor. And what we're doing here is essentially squeezing the muscles around the sperm ducts, the physical channels where sperm and ejaculation would leave our body. We start by squeezing that back, and it's almost like you're pulling that energy back using your muscular contractions. And then you can come around the perineum and the anus, and essentially it's creating this wave of muscular contraction from the front of our genitals back to the tailbone. And it's normal to not have that level of finesse and control of those muscles in the pelvic floor right away if you're new to this work. But over time, you can start to develop a little more individual muscle control. If that's not available to you right away, it's okay. Just squeeze the anus and the perineum and contract the whole pelvic floor and just focus on drawing that energy up to the tailbone. And as we do this, we're taking an inhalation. So the process is essentially build the energy up, pause for a moment, and then start to inhale. And as you start to inhale, you squeeze the pelvic floor and you can squeeze the anus and focus your attention on drawing that energy and that muscular contraction back to the tailbone. And then at that point, we've taken a breath in, and now we're going to take several more sips of air in. So it's several more small inhalations. And as we're doing that, we're creating this pumping action, kind of like you're pumping the brakes in a car, but we're pumping and squeezing the pelvic floor to pump this energy up the spine. And as we do that, as we're doing these muscular contractions with each sip of air in, we're drawing our awareness using the power of our mental focus and attention to encourage and coax that sexual energy up the spine, all the way eventually up to the crown of the head. And there are a few like a few body positions and other areas of the body that we can contract to help this. Particularly, what I'll mention is tucking the chin in towards the chest. So when we bring that energy up to the base of the skull, essentially, tucking the chin in will help that energy to then more easily move up the back of the skull. So you can tuck the chin down towards your chest, and then at that around that same time, then you can roll the eyes up to the top of the head. And so rolling our eyes back in our head and pointing them as much as we can towards the very top of our head, the crown. And this is essentially where we're inviting all of that energy to come up to. And so by squeezing the pelvic floor, and you can squeeze the glutes and the buttocks as well. You can also squeeze the hands and the fists. What is important though is that we're not creating a lot of contraction in the front side of our torso. So you don't want to necessarily just squeeze every muscle in the body. Keeping the chest and the pecs as soft as we can. We're looking at squeezing the muscles on the backside of the body because that's where we're pulling the energy up. And so I'll start from the beginning. We're building sexual energy and arousal, and then we take a brief pause, focus ourselves, and then take an inhale. We're breathing in as we squeeze the pelvic floor, and we focus that muscular contraction and the energy movement to go up to the tailbone. And then with one inhalation already being taken, we're going to take several more. We'll say 9 is the typical recommended number in Taoism. So we're taking 9 more small sips of air on top of that original inhalation. And with each small sip of air, we're contracting the pelvic floor in this pulsing action. And we're drawing our awareness and attention up the back of the spine, tucking the chin in towards the chest, roll the eyes to the top of the head, and then place all of your attention and awareness right on the top of the head as you finish your muscular contractions. And you can, at this point, I'll often like to remain in the breath hold and sometimes remain in a pelvic floor contraction for as long as feels comfortable, as long as is available, or as long as feels necessary in that moment to allow that energy to move all the way up to the crown of the head. So it's going to sound something like this. We're taking an inhalation and squeezing the pelvic floor. And then we're taking 9 more sips while we pulse and contract the pelvic floor. And then you can hold the breath here, focus all of your attention at the top of the head, roll the eyes back, tuck the chin in, and then eventually exhale. And then at that point, we're relaxing and softening the entire body. Just allow yourself to go as as soft, as limp as possible. And limp is an appropriate word here, not only for our limbs and the muscles of our body, but also what will happen here is we will bring our erection down a little bit. And that's good. That is showing us that we have now moved some of that sexual energy out of the genitals. And it's totally okay to lose your erection midway during sex. As long as you are still inside your partner, you can go soft. You can go 50% erection or even less and remain inside your partner. And then that is indicating, okay, now I'm definitely not going to ejaculate. I've just moved blood and energy, and my erection has gone down. And now that will allow you to start building that energy up again. And that energy hasn't left your body, it's just moved away from the genitals. And so, like I was saying earlier on in this episode, that has now opened up a bunch of space in your genitals to build up more energy. And in that way, we can amplify the sexual energy. And in doing so, we're increasing our energy till eventually the point where we get to an overflow and we can enjoy those states of non-ejaculatory orgasmic bliss that are possible when we're in that accumulation of energy. So what I described there is one round of the big draw, and the big draw can be done multiple times. It's often recommended to do it 3 times or 6 times or 9 times. Personally, I find at this point for me, I'll do it 3 times, sometimes only once, and that's enough to move that energy sufficiently. My erection comes down, and then after a brief period of resting, I can start to bring a little movement in again and build that energy and build the erection up again, and then come back up to that place where it's like, okay, now I'm approaching the edge, time to do the big draw again. And what happens for me, oftentimes after doing the big draw a few times and building that energy up and then allowing it to move, allowing the erection to come down and then build it back up again, 2 or 3 or 4 times of doing that within lovemaking, eventually when I do the big draw and then exhale and relax and soften everything and just come into stillness, that's when those non-ejaculatory orgasmic states can start to be experienced and move through me. And I want to highlight, before we move on here, the importance of the relaxation part of this. The big draw is a pretty yang style practice. There's a lot of, we're clenching muscles, we're being really intentional and taking this big breath, and it can be activating for the sympathetic nervous system. And we always want to allow ourselves to find a balance again. And so after we do the big draw, it can be really activating and energizing. And then the way to bring balance in after that is to go into that softening, the letting go, the surrendering. And all that can still happen while you're inside your partner. It does happen while you're inside your partner. And there's a lot of energy moving internally and circulating between you and your partner, and a lot of pleasure happening, even though the body is still. And so this is where the valley orgasm comes in. And so in that place of stillness and rest, we can sync our breath up with our partner and let go of any muscular contractions. But what's important is that we're still staying mentally focused on the circulation of that energy internally within ourselves, or circulating through our partner and ourselves. And so there can be a lot happening with our mental focus and a lot happening in the circulation of energy internally while we're in that place of physical stillness and rest, just allowing the breath to be long and slow. And that is the balance, and that's the sweet spot in my experience. So that's what I'll say for the how-to with the big draw practice for now. Do you have any questions around that, Ben, or anything that you'd like to add in?
Yeah, so one thing I've heard you mention before is doing this in partnership as well, that 2 partners can do this together. Would you like to speak a little bit about that practice?
Yeah, so there is a big draw practice for men, and there's a big draw practice for women. And it's a little different, but it's quite similar. And if you're a man listening to this and you're really inspired and motivated to learn these practices and to bring them into your relationship, I know for some men, there can be a sense of like, oh, but I'm studying all these things and I'm really excited about this, but my partner doesn't seem interested. And is that going to be a problem for me? And that goes both ways. A woman may be studying these things and really interested in this, but her partner isn't. And to that, I would say that it's enough for one partner to be in study and devotion with this, and bringing that into the sexual union will start to awaken those things within the other partner. And what I noticed is that when I started doing the big draw practice, my partner, without having read about how to specifically do it in a female body and all of that, she just naturally started following my lead. And she would breathe with me and she would engage in the practice. And she does. Often, usually, when I go into it, it's natural for her to be like, oh, yeah, we're doing this thing now. Okay. And she'll do it too. And then so we're breathing together.
Yeah.
And holding the breath, and then when I exhale, she exhales and I go soft, and she's like, yeah, okay, we're. And so over time, even without having studied it, our partners can start to learn and understand what's happening. And if you're doing it right, it's going to be enhancing the sexual experience for both of you. And so it will become natural. There it's okay if you have some self-consciousness around bringing this in. If your partner doesn't know about it, it might be valuable to let him or her know ahead of time, like, hey, I'd like to try this thing out today. So just so you know, when I start breathing in this way, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. Giving a little heads up could be helpful.
Mm.
And like I was saying, eventually when we're doing this correctly, it's going to be enhancing the experience for everyone. So it will, in my observation, just naturally invite them to do it as well, because why not? It feels great and it seems to be working in marvelous ways. So,
Yeah.
so try it out. And if your partner doesn't do it, that's okay too. Yeah, as long as they're understanding and consenting to you doing it, then that's enough, as I was saying before, and we can circulate the energy through our partner as well, just with our mental focus that it is doing something, and it will amplify the experience if our partner is doing it also, but it's not necessary.
Yeah. And this is a great point to bring up, practicing, before we go to the game day. As we say, like these solo cultivation practices, we'd recommend, if whether you're new to this or haven't practiced in a while, you've come across it before, getting it pretty dialed on your own, as Hawk spoke to, getting to that 70 or 80% arousal level, towards the point of no return, and playing with this and practicing it and noticing, when your cock's going soft, or you can start to really feel some of these subtle, energetic kind of orgasmic states that can come online. That's a really good sign of it working. And the more you practice it outside of the bedroom, the more finesse you'll have when you bring it into the bedroom, of course. So,
Yeah. I know we're coming right up on time, Ben. I wanted to bring it back real quick, though, to the tongue on the roof of the mouth,
mhm.
because if you're listening, you might be wondering, okay, what's the deal with the tongue? You mentioned it, but then I didn't specifically speak to that
Mhm.
in the steps. So for me, in my experience, it's not necessary to have the tongue connected to the roof of the mouth while you're doing those inhalations. And especially if you're breathing in through an open mouth, it's not natural to have the tongue on the roof of the mouth. So don't worry about that when you're doing the actual big draw breathing. It can be through an open mouth, with your tongue just resting wherever it is. But when we get into the rest part, that's when it's imperative that we connect the tongue to the roof of the mouth. And this is true in sex and in sexual arousal, and also just in all of our day-to-day life. Whenever it's possible, placing the tongue on the roof of the mouth behind the teeth and breathing in and out through the nose. This is our natural, functional breathing positioning of our mouth, and breathing in and out through the nose the vast majority of the time is really important for good health. So when you're doing the big draw breathing practice, I say don't worry about where your tongue is. Just focus on the muscular contractions, your mental focus, and the breath. And then as soon as you let that exhale out and you soften the body, then connect the tongue to the roof of the mouth and allow that energy to start to sink back down the front side.
Yeah, and if you're experiencing, dizziness or headaches or anything like that, some guys do. Just place the tongue to your roof of your mouth and slow the breathing down as we're speaking to, and allow it to settle, and just let yourself cool down a bit, because as Hawks mentioned, this is a very fiery practice. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So real quick on that, if you're noticing there's pressure in the head and you sense that, oh, maybe I've got excess energy in the head, as you were saying, Ben, place the tongue to the roof of the mouth, breathe in through the nose and breathe down into your belly, big, slow belly breath. And then as you exhale, you can imagine and with your mental attention and focus, just as you exhale, send that energy right down to the bottoms of your feet. Where our attention goes, energy flows. And so it might seem a little esoteric or woo-woo to be like, oh, we can move energy just with our mental focus, but it's real. And there are, I won't go into all the examples of how that can be shown and proven in real life, but just understanding that, okay, it's important to just breathe slow into the belly, connect the tongue to the roof of the mouth, and as you exhale, just send that breath and that focus down to the bottoms of the feet, and that's going to help sink that energy back down. You can also wipe your hands down the front side of your body,
yeah,
and just help that out physically with touch as well.
the
So
thymus gland. Yeah, yeah, and also just to riff for a second on that last point, you know, ultimately we just say find out for yourself. Like if you are doubtful of, does it seem a little woo woo? Well, just try going a couple weeks of semen retention and try bringing in these practices and see what you notice, because that's ultimately where the truth lies. Uh, so yeah, for anyone listening in, that's always an invitation for you. So I know we're coming on right up on time here, Hawks. Is there any last things you want to drop before we sign off?
no, I'll just say that I hope this was valuable for some of you listening in, and I'm sure that there's questions that you might have now or that might come up for you. A great way to get in contact with us and a great place to bring questions that you have is our school community. So SKOOL school.com. You can find us, Men's Sexual Mastery, in school there, and there's a free community that you can join, and we really invite you and encourage you to come check us out there. There's some free resources, and you can write a question that you have about this practice or anything in this arena, and we'd love to be of support there and answer your questions. And there's free calls that you can join there, and lots to check out. So I just encourage you to come find us in school at Men's Sexual Mastery if you want to bring some questions or learn a little more or find out what's possible for you moving forward on this path. And with that, pass it back to you to close this out, Ben.
As always, big shout out to all the men in our community. Thank you guys for making this possible. And thank you to all you listeners out there. Thank you guys for helping this podcast and this mission continue to grow. If you get a chance and can leave us a review, or if you have a friend who you think this would benefit, if you could pass it along or drop any comments below, we always appreciate the engagement. So wishing you all a beautiful week, and may you experience all sorts of beautiful states using this practice and many more that we're teaching on here. And we'll see you in the next episode.
See you there.